Hi everybody, my name is Brady and I am a 19th century American historian, and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be doing more of Mr. Beat's American Presidential Election series, and we're doing the election of 1824. One of the most controversial elections, one of my favorites, one of the most interesting. And when I say it's controversial, I mean the execution was controversial. Having John Quincy Adams walk out with the presidency is not at all controversial because it seems to make sense. The guy is so qualified to be president, despite the fact that his presidency isn't remembered all that fondly. It made a whole lot of sense, but it was the time for Andrew Jackson. But it got delayed a good 4 years. How does America handle that? We'll see that next time, but this time, let's see the corrupt bargain go down.
Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History.
Every time.
The 10th presidential election in American history took place from Tuesday, October 26th to Thursday, December 2nd.
I'm just saying, look at this boat. Technology, man. It's changing. A lot's going on in the American I mean, as we move into the American West, there's a whole lot going on. Technology's changing. I could have sworn there were solar panels in the background here. That's not solar panels, but it looked like it, and that would have been funny.
1824. It's one of my favorite elections to look at because it was so unusual and fascinating. First of all, it's important to note that this was the first election in which white men came out in droves to vote. It used to be that only rich white men could vote in elections, but more and more laws now made it so that poor white men could vote because property ownership was no longer a requirement. So
this is huge, and I don't remember what the number was in the previous video. I don't recall, but they're going to give us a number at the end of this one, and it's going to be crazy higher. I think it's about a quarter of the nation, which, dope.
So remember that later on. Okay, so James Monroe had a relatively smooth tenure as president and decided not to seek a third term, keeping the two-term tradition. His vice president, Daniel D. Tompkins, was lucky to be reelected back in 1820 because a lot of fellow Democratic Republicans didn't like him. In 1824, he was still in no shape to run for president because many still didn't like him. He had mismanaged his money and had a horrible debt, and he suffered from alcoholism and just overall poor health.
This is one of those cases where I'm learning a little bit about a guy who's very much overlooked. He might be rightfully overlooked because the vice presidential position was not a huge deal. There's only a handful of vice presidents, you know, outside of the ones that go on to become the president. There's only a handful of vice presidents that are like a huge deal. There are some that really know how to use the leverage of the position and really function as a co-president, but there's a very few that can really say that they made it to that level. I don't know much about this guy, so I assume he's not that important, but, you know, he might have something about him that is unfairly overlooked. Who knows? Maybe he's the next person that historians should go back and give a second look to. But I wouldn't put money on it.
Had a horrible debt, and he suffered from alcoholism and just overall poor health. Tragically, he died just 3 months after leaving office. There was still only one major political party at the time, the Democratic Republican Party. Yet there was a power vacuum within the party.
Let's talk about James Monroe and what his era left. We call it the era of good feelings, but there's a lot of division being sown right now. So we have all these people who are technically Democratic Republicans, but they're all kind of splitting off into their own little sub-factions. The fact that we have Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and John Quincy Adams all in the same group, that's not because they're all perfectly aligned with one another. That's because there's really not an alternative right now. It's going to split off. We're going to get the Democratic Party, which has the lineage that goes up to today, uninterrupted, though very different. We have a very aggressive Democratic Party of Andrew Jackson's age, and now we have the very timid Democratic Party of today. Just saying. And then we're going to have the Whigs who are going to show up, and Henry Clay is a huge Whig figure. And then we got John Quincy Adams. He's going to go over there. We got handsome John C. Calhoun down here. I'm just saying, like, most pictures you see of the guy, he looks awful. He looks like an old bastard who's been dead for a very long time. He's looking good there.
Because of this, a flood of candidates rushed in, all wanting to be president. The election ended up being more about each candidate's personality and regional rivalries because each candidate agreed on most of the major issues. Think of the primary elections and caucuses of today within political parties to get their nominee. That's basically what this presidential election was, except they couldn't agree on who would be nominated and therefore president. There were originally 6 Democratic-Republican candidates who stood out. There was Smith Thompson of New York, who was the Secretary of the Navy. Seeing he had no chance against stiff competition, he ended up withdrawing from the race. Next up was John C. Calhoun.
I'd imagine Secretary of the Navy would have been a pretty well-respected position after the War of 1812. I mean, when you come out of the... And I guess we've been out of it for a little bit now, so maybe it's... I don't know if it's valued as much as it would have been, like, coming right out of it. Like, there was a lot of pride in the military at the time, so I'd imagine they would get behind figures like that. But, you know, it is Secretary of Navy, and we have Andrew Jackson on the lineup, and he's definitely more well-respected for his military history.
Of South Carolina, who was the Secretary of War. He also dropped out of the race later when he realized he didn't stand a chance. That left 4 other candidates who did stick it out. William H. Crawford, the Secretary of the Treasury from Georgia, had actually been nominated by a caucus of a minority of the Democratic-Republican members of the U.S. Congress. However, the rest of Congress viewed the caucus as elitist and undemocratic, so they ignored it.
Crawford is going to be the most forgotten in this, and it's not because he was the least popular. Henry Clay actually loses out to Crawford, so I guess it's because he's not at all involved in the sketchiness towards the end. We have Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams. They have some apparent collusion, and then we have Andrew Jackson, who seemed like he was what the country was ready for, but he doesn't get it for at least another 4 years.
Next up was Henry Clay, the well-known and well-respected Speaker of the House from Kentucky. He probably would have received his party's caucus nomination if he had wanted it, but he thought the caucus process was not the best way to elect presidential candidates. John Quincy Adams, oldest son of former President John Adams and Secretary of State from Massachusetts, tended to have support from many former Federalists. Finally,
that's a big deal. Yeah, the Federalists are a dead party, but they gotta go somewhere. There are probably some younger Federalists who are going to be around for the next generation who might end up becoming Whigs. It's good to have them. It doesn't hurt. I think John Quincy Adams has something unique geographically. Andrew Jackson, he has a very broad geographic base, I suppose. Henry Clay is seen as the candidate of the West, because that's about how west the country went. It's not super... We don't have a lot of west yet. We're working on that. Like, we have it, we just not settled all of it. So he was seen as kind of a western candidate, and I don't know as much about Crawford. I don't know if he said where he was from. Maybe the South. I don't know.
There was Andrew Jackson, the War of 1812 military hero, former governor and senator from Tennessee, who many viewed as a champion of the, quote, common man. Like I said, with the exception of maybe disagreements over tariffs and the government's role with infrastructure, these candidates agreed on most issues. This election was about personality and supporting the candidate voters could relate to the most.
And they will divide a little bit more as time goes on. Things will get a little bit more tense. We're coming out of the era of good feelings, so don't think that Henry Clay, John Quincy Adams, and Andrew Jackson are going to be on the same page virtually for the next generation, because that's not how it's going to be. That's just the less divisive period that we are in right now. But it's building to a more divisive period that will come, and Andrew Jackson will kind of usher in. When the Democratic Party comes around, game over, man.
It was very much a regional election. Crawford had much support in parts of the East, Clay had support in the West, Adams had support in the Northeast, and Jackson had support pretty much all over. Because
okay, Crawford was an East dude. Okay, I didn't... fine.
The election was highly contested. There was heavy campaigning from all sides, with the exception of Crawford, who suffered from a stroke due to a bad prescription. You heard that right. However, back then candidates usually sat on the sidelines while their supporters did most of the campaigning anyway. In addition to the usual forms of campaigning, a bunch of parody songs popped up to support candidates, most notably Hunters of Kentucky, a parody of the song The Unfortunate Miss Bailey. Weird Al Yankovic would be so proud.
So they're still not campaigning like really openly. It's still kind of a hush-hush. I'm not going to ask for it, but I'm going to have my friends ask for me to be president and stuff like that. That's just kind of how this stuff goes. But it's more open than it was before. Like, Aaron Burr was seen as one of the early open campaigners. But the thing is, with suffrage being completely different, he had to appeal to the elite. Now they have to appeal to more ordinary people, which is huge.
Did I mention the vice president candidates? There were a lot. Let's see, we originally had Albert Gallatin, who was nominated by that congressional caucus that didn't count. Officially on the ballot come October were Nathan Sanford from New York, Nathaniel Macon from North Carolina, Martin Van Buren from New York.
Martin Van Buren is going to be kind of like a co-founder of the Democratic Party, so remember him going forward. And also, fun fact, he was Dutch. His English was not his first language, though he was born in America, which is interesting. He's a New Yorker, which is also demographic-wise going to be really cool for him going forward with his alliance with Andrew Jackson.
And the aforementioned John C. Calhoun, Henry Clay, and Andrew Jackson. And here are the results. Well, the
Jackson
results
as
were
VP.
inconclusive. There was no clear winner. Andrew Jackson received 99 electoral votes, more electoral votes than any other candidate, but he did not receive the majority electoral votes needed to win the election, which was 131. John Quincy Adams came in second with 84 electoral votes, Crawford third with 41, and Clay fourth with 37. John C. Calhoun became the 7th vice president in American history after receiving 182 electoral votes. Good thing he dropped out of the presidential race, know what I'm saying? But
yeah.
who would be president?
Yeah, I think Calhoun could have stood a pretty good chance. He could have had the South locked down. Though that would have added another person. It would probably push somebody like Clay out, and maybe even Crawford. But it would have further complicated the already complicated results that we have here.
President? Well, the answer was in the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, which said the House of Representatives would decide who would be president if no candidate received a majority of the electoral vote. Only the top 3 candidates would be considered, so this left out Henry Clay. Jackson, Adams, and Crawford remained.
And Crawford otherwise would not have stood much of a chance, but if the people in charge really like him, then maybe they'd totally be able to overturn the will of the American people. However, I don't think they would dare to do that. So the only real candidates we have here are Jackson and Adams. They're still kind of close when you think about it. If you happen to pick Adams, which they will, it's not as egregious as if they picked Crawford, but it's still going to be seen a little bit as overturning democracy or like the will of the people, whatever. Because Jackson, he had the most people, and that's a huge thing. Having the popular vote is very important for legitimizing your presidency. While we all go into the presidential election agreeing and understanding what the rules are, we might disagree on the rules, but we understand what the rules are going into it, people will still be like, well, your presidency isn't as legitimate because you didn't have all the people behind you, or most of the people behind you.
Remember, Henry Clay was Speaker of the House and extremely influential in Congress. Clay hated Andrew Jackson. In January of 1825, he told a friend, quote, "I cannot believe that killing 2,500 Englishmen at New Orleans qualifies for the various difficult and complicated duties of the Chief Magistracy."
Magistracy.
Clay used his influence to convince more people to vote for Adams, whom he agreed with more on issues anyway, instead of Jackson. When the House voted...
This is huge. This is what Jackson will dub the corrupt bargain. I think Clay definitely was pushing for himself because he gets a position in Adams' cabinet, the exact position he wants, and he'll probably talk about that. I think Mr. B is very smart to emphasize the fact that he would have gone for Adams anyway. Clay did not... this isn't a situation where if Jackson offered him the same position... well, I guess in the case, if Jackson offered him the position and then he turned, that would be a huge bit of corruption there because obviously he was not in line with Andrew Jackson prior. However, him and John Quincy Adams were not nearly as far apart, so it doesn't feel nearly as corrupt as Jackson will make it out to be. Although, if they had that conversation, if there was a wink and a nod, if it was a quid pro quo, that is not cool. Isn't that a strong stance? That's not cool. Don't do that.
On February 9th, 1825, John Quincy Adams was the winner, becoming the 6th president of the United States and the first of 2 presidents who was the son of a former president, the other being George W. Bush. Andrew Jackson was shocked. After all, not only did he receive the most electoral votes, but he received the most votes total, with 41.4% of the popular vote compared to Adams getting 30.9%. It was the first and only presidential election in which the candidate who received the most electoral...
I'm starting to think, what if Crawford wasn't in it? I wonder how much of that would have gone to Adams, because he said he had it locked down in the East, but I don't know, that could have gone either way. I'm not sure. That's interesting to think about. I'm gonna have to look into Crawford's base, because that could change one's perspective on it.
Votes did not become president, and the first of 4 presidential elections in which the candidate who won the popular vote did not become president. After the election, word got out that Clay struck a deal with Adams in which Clay would become Secretary of State if Adams was elected, a position Clay wanted because Adams and his 3 predecessors had all served as Secretary of State prior to becoming president.
Perpetually almost president is scheming again. Yeah. If he got this, like, explicit agreement here, that's totally effed up. Despite the fact that I don't like the idea of Andrew Jackson having become president. It's going to lead to a lot of bad things. If you think of, like, the principle of democracy, I don't want this sort of bargaining to occur. It is very sketchy, and I'd rather it just simply be up to the people rather than scamming on behalf of the candidates. Yeah, you don't need me to tell you that that's weird.
Sure enough, after Adams was elected, he appointed Clay his Secretary of State. Jackson and his supporters were enraged, calling the apparent deal between Adams and Clay a, quote, corrupt bargain.
And he's right and wrong. Like I said, Clay would have gone there anyway. But the fact that he did it to secure a position is unethical. So if Clay did it with no expectation of having a position, it would have been fine. Who cares? But the fact that there is the expectation of having the position of Secretary of State, that's the problem.
While Clay denied the charges, the damage was already done. The so-called corrupt bargain would haunt Adams' presidency the next 4 years.
26.9.
I'll see you for the next election, buddy.
Yeah, so having over a quarter of the country voting, and it's going to be even weirder when we get to 1828, you'll be surprised, or maybe you won't, at how much it jumps up from there when we actually get Andrew Jackson in office, because it's going to happen. This is just delaying the inevitable. I have this sort of love-hate relationship with Andrew Jackson because he's like an offensive cartoon of a president. And I am excited to get to his stuff. Although it's awful, it's very entertaining to see some of the political drama he gets himself in. So we'll get to 1828 next time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave me a like. Subscribe for more. I do videos every single day. Hopefully we'll have something interesting coming out tomorrow. Tomorrow's Saturday. I always do something different. I don't know what I'm going to be doing on Saturday, but I'll find out by the time it comes out. I'll probably find out the same time you do. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.